everyone, welcome to the class again. In the last class we saw what are the signaling components, what are the basic need of signaling, or why we need signaling, what is signaling, how do we participate in signaling, and so on. Today we are going to discuss that what is the need of signaling. We briefly got introduced in the last class what is the need of signaling. Let's see it in more detail that what is the need of signaling. Remember in the previous class we saw that when we talk about sensory perception, automatically we think about signaling. Remember we said that perception is signaling, reaction is signaling, response is signaling. So when we talk about the signaling or where do we need signaling, we can automatically think about the sensory perception. And we all know about the spatial senses which we have in our body, whether it is related to the vision, hearing, taste, or for that matter even touch, heat, pressure. All those are different sensations which would require signaling. Again, if you see in this image, one of the very important sensory perception which we have is hearing. And if you recollect, in the last class we saw how this is a mode of communication where one individual is sending out signal and the other individual is receiving that signal. And there we emphasize that you will need a transmitter, you will need a receiver. So in case of sensory perception which is particularly related to hearing, we need signaling. Also we emphasized in the previous class that almost every aspect of we being a living individual, we need signaling. When you are sleeping, when you are awake, every time signaling goes on. Some signaling we appreciate, some we don't. But in the sensory perception, all sensory organs are participating actively in the signaling process, and here we are seeing how the signaling is happening, particularly in the case of audition. We all know that our ear, external ear, receives the waves which actually falls on the eardrum, and this vibration is communicated to the internal ear. Now you may wonder where exactly signaling is happening. What is the source of the signal? Remember we discussed about biotic and abiotic sources of signal. So here the sound waves, those are abiotic form of signal. So if we think about hearing as an example of signaling, we will see later, or you may think about it, you may read about it, that where exactly the signaling is going on when the process of hearing is happening. But for your information, the signaling in this context is basically happening in the internal ear, and from there the message goes to the brain region. So in process of hearing, you have a communication which is set up between internal ear and the regions of the brain where the analysis of sound waves happen. If we talk about the sensory perception further, one of the best appreciated sensory perception is the taste perception. We all know that different types of tastes are there, as shown in this GIF. You can see that the person appreciates the taste which he is getting from whatever edible item he touches to his tongue. So here the sensory perception starts at the tongue, and it is analyzed in the brain. And response in this case seems to be from his facial expression. But normally taste perception starts at the tongue. There are definite cell types which engage in perceiving these tastes, We know that there are different types of taste receptors or taste buds in our tongue. Basically, those are collection of cells which perceive different tastes, and we know that hot, sour, sweet and bitter, these are different types of and salty. These are different types of taste perception which we have in our body. So in all these cases, tongue serves as the transmitter, because this rather in these cases of taste perception, the signal is available to the cells which are present in tongue. From here, signal is further relayed to the brain, where the analysis happen, and then response is mounted, whether we make face or make face by saying that okay, the taste was pathetic, it was poor, or we enjoy the taste, relish the taste, whether it is very tasty, sweet, or it has particular blend or what you like. So eventually the response in case of taste will be reflected in your facial expression. You can also say that in case of taste perception, the signaling kind of culminates in the salivation process. So you see the edible item which you like and you start to salivate. This is also a signaling response. It does not automatically happen. Maybe you have heard this in context of reflex, that seeing the food item you start to salivate. It's a reflex in other contexts understood that way, but in case of signaling, you know, that is a classical example of signaling which is initiated by abiotic type of signals. The other thing where you will need the signaling to go on in another type of sensory perception, you will need this signaling to continue, and that is where it is about the smell sensation, what is also called as olfaction. You know the aroma which is there around flowers and other things. I'm sure many of you would appreciate a variety of fruit by smelling, right? So in that case also, olfaction also, you are engaging into the signaling process. The sensory perception particularly related to the olfaction, you are engaging in the signaling process. Like in case of taste perception, you saw that taste buds were the ones which were receiving the signal. Here, where do you think the receptors or receivers for the aroma is? You know that aroma, it could be bad sensation or foul sensation, foul aroma, or a pleasing aroma. Both of them are sensed in the same nasal epithelium which is present. So in this case, you can see that the lady is smelling the rose, and the facial expression itself is telling you what kind of aroma is emanating from there. So very much like the taste perception which we saw in the previous case, here also you have receivers which are present in the nasal epithelium. So what you can notice here, again, very much similar to our taste, what you can notice here again, similar to the taste perception, the olfactory cues or the signals are received in the nasal epithelium. From there, these cells which receive these olfactory cues, they are specialized cells, neurons, which conduct the signal to the brain, and from there the analysis is basically now routed back, the response is mounted, and you would see the facial expression telling you whether it's a good aroma or foul aroma. I'm sure you would have closed your nose when you're passing by a manhole or sewer, because the aroma is bad, and that's the only way to stop the signaling which is happening as a olfaction cue. Now, what else you would need this signaling for? I started saying that you would need signaling for almost everything. Our existence itself is a consequence of signaling. So we may get into a situation where you have to respond quickly, or you may be in a situation which is favorable, so you respond differently, or a situation where things are not favorable, you respond in a very different manner. So a condition which can be placed or posed to you, in which you do your system does the signaling. And again, when we'll discuss more later, largely we are talking about the signaling which happens between cell to cell, and it is manifested eventually as a signaling which is happening between tissues or between organs. So when you have a situation like chemoattraction, not necessarily for humans, but many small organisms, they engage in the process of chemoattraction. One of such organism is called dictyostelium. You may have heard of this organism. It's an organism which exists in a unicellular format, as well as it can form the large fruiting body structures. And they are very quick to respond to a small chemical entity which is called cyclic AMP. When you take a media or a system where your dictyostelium is growing, suppose you have a situation where dictyostelium is nicely growing on a plate. If I make these dots as a dictyostelium, they are growing and the movement is random. But if you place a tip with cyclic AMP, what will happen? All these dictyostelium which were moving randomly, they start to move in the direction where the CAMP is present in high gradient. And what will eventually look like that after some time, all these dictyostelium are congregated at one particular place. And after this, if you move this tip and bring it here, you would see that slowly they start to migrate in this direction. So you can actually make new focus where these organisms start to move. Similarly, many bacteria, they also engage in chemoattraction by following the signaling processes. The other example where we know the signaling plays very important role is the resistance. We also host resistance, we also pose a resistance to a condition. Bacteria, small organisms, they also pose resistance to a given condition. Particularly if we think about the antibiotic resistance. So many microbes, they have developed this ability to come together. They signal each other in presence of antibiotic-like molecules. They signal each other and all these microbes come together and they form a sheet or a film. And this film is much more resistant to the action of the antibiotic, then individual bacterium or group of bacterium, the kind of resistance they can pose. So what actually happens in such cases is that you get these bacteria, suppose they are growing on a plate. So you have individual bacteria like we saw in previous case, the Dictyostelium. You have these individual bacteria, they are growing happily into the system, but slowly when they get the cue that they have to develop the antibiotic resistance, or they have to build a resistance against any such entity, they start to come together and form a film around it, a layer around it. The bacteria can go inside and they secrete some compound and make a layer around themselves. Because of this, what will happen, if in the system suddenly if the antibiotic is coming, it may not work as efficiently as it would have worked on a single bacteria. Also you can think about that if there is an organism which eats solitary bacteria, when they form the film, that organism, suppose there is a unicellular amoeba which is coming here, it could have feasted on these solitary growing bacteria, but when they form the film, the access to the individual bacteria is limited. So the process of moving from a solitary bacteria to this biofilm formation is something is signaling dependent. So bacteria communicate with each other and say that now it is time that we go into a biofilm and protect ourselves. Okay. So this is another example, another process in which you will see signaling coming and playing very important role. Further, you will notice that the process of proliferation and growth is also tightly regulated by signaling. In the beginning I said that our existence itself is a consequence of signaling. Why did I say that? Because the gametes which are formed from male gamete or female gamete, their fusion process, it's almost equivalent to chemoattraction. Also, their fusion process is tightly regulated by signaling. We may see some of these things as we go ahead in the course. Now, when we think about the proliferation and growth, what exactly we understand from proliferation and growth? Proliferation would be that more individuals produced. When we say individual here, we need not think about the individual as organism. Rather here we are thinking about more cells being produced. Remember, when we will discussing more signaling, we will talk more about the cell signaling. So more cells are being produced, that's your proliferation. When cell needs to grow in size to accommodate certain things and perform in a given situation, it grows in size. So whether it is the increase in the size or increase in the number, both are tightly regulated by signaling process. If I can give you an example, so we all know that when cells are growing in number, they divide in two different ways. One is what we call as mitosis and the other one is meiosis. So in this case, what you would notice is that under mitosis and meiosis process, you will probably have one cell. In case of mitosis, one cell divides and give rise to two daughter cells. So multiple signaling events are working here, where it is ensured that the division is faithful and it is equal for chromatin. So in your mitosis, before the two daughter cells are formed, it is very well checked, and through signaling events, it is very well confirmed that the division is equational and same amount of chromatin has gone into two daughter cells. Now in meiosis we know that this happens in very specific type of cells, germ cells, and they produce from, if we talk about the sperms, from one mother cell you produce 4 spermatids, right. So the type of division which should occur to accommodate the proliferation is also different and tightly regulated by signaling. The cells know that they have to undergo meiosis or they have to undergo mitosis. How does this happen? There is a strong signaling component which is present over there. We might discuss some of this in later classes. Also, the growth when we say, or division which we see in a smaller organism by simple binary fission. So you have one cell, bacterial cell, somewhere they decide and they have to divide through binary fission, you end up generating 2 bacteria, right. So sense of the availability of nutrients and presence of more bacterium kind of gets signals to these cells to undergo division or not. So binary fission is also regulated by that. And we talk about the growth. Some cells, you know, they are very active because they are producing a lot of enzymes. So they also keep getting the signal that they have to make more proteins, more enzymes, and for that matter they will grow also in size. They accommodate more subcellular organelles in the body, meaning here the cytosol, and then they become more functional. So whether it is proliferation or growth, even that is being tightly regulated by the signaling process. What else is regulated by signaling process? That's something which we call as immunity. You know different cell types which are present in our immune system. You know that cells directly participate, or the cells which are part of immune system, rather than directly participating, they release something, right. You know that there are cells like T cells or macrophages. They will directly go and eat up or clear the pathogen which comes into the vicinity. How do they know that the pathogen is around? And what process they should initiate to engulf this pathogen? The process to know that pathogen is around is a signaling event. Which definitely needs a contribution from pathogen. So there must be something as a signal coming from pathogen which is sensed by these immune cells or phagocytic cells so that they can clear the pathogen. Then there are B cell types, you also know this. All the antibodies which we say for like IgG antibody, I hope you know different types of antibodies. IgG is the most prominent one, which is produced as immunity which we have against, or which we develop against certain infections. So these cells, rather than countering the pathogen directly, they believe or they trust a method by which they will be releasing this molecule IgG into the system. So the presence of pathogen must initiate a pathway signaling cascade in these B cells which asks them to release, make more IgG and release them into the system, and this will eventually go and counter the pathogen. You may have also heard about different other cell types in the immune system which are rich in granules or granulocytes like basophils or neutrophils. These cell types, they host a system inside their cytosol, and this system basically, again, rather than directly hitting the pathogen, the neutrophils or basophils, they have vesicles rich in compounds, and these compounds negate the pathogen. So basically you have different mechanism by which different cells of the immune system, they receive the signal and then activate themselves and thus participate in the immunity development. So you would notice that different cell types, they come into picture, they activate themselves and also negate the pathogen or counter the pathogen. So this is another process in which we will need signaling going on. Now what we can see is that basically, if I can summarize this immunity part, so you can have different cell types. So not only that, these different cells in the blood which is part of our immune system, different cell types, if I say neutrophils, if I say B cells, T cells, macrophages and so on. Not only that, they work in different ways, but also they all originate from similar precursor cells So basically you have the same precursor cell which will give rise to different immune cells. So which of these precursor cell will go to macrophage, which will go to B cells, which will become neutrophils, or which will become T cell? There is a strong signaling mechanism which tells these precursor cells that your destination is to become neutrophil or your destination is to become macrophage. So in essence, what we have understood in today's class is that signaling is needed for all the aspects of living being. Here I have listed only things which are broadly seen and appreciated in context of signaling. The communication as such, whether we are talking about the we are talking and we are hearing and understanding what is being spoken. The sensory perception on its responses, whether it is related to taste, olfaction, touch, or other things. We also understood that the signaling is very important for growth and proliferation. Different cells in our body, they need to divide, they need to know when they need to divide and which way they need to divide, whether mitotically or meiotically. That is tightly regulated by the signaling. We also saw that our immune system is dependent on the signaling process, not only to sense the presence of pathogen and mount the response accordingly, but also from precursor cells. When these immune cells are being produced, these are tightly regulated by a very specific type of signaling which makes a precursor cell into a macrophage or into a monocyte or into a neutrophil. Then we saw that how the signaling is very integral to the resistance which microbes generate, also in the form of biofilm. In this context, you may like to read or you may like to understand another process which is called quorum sensing. When you have less number of bacteria, they cannot sense the presence of each other. When there are more bacteria, they sense very tightly and they come together, and one of the example of quorum sensing is that by coming together they also form the biofilm. Thank you.